We'll begin. So I am delighted to introduce Meryem Dede, who, as you may know, is a colleague of Lynn Keelhorn, a very active member of the Westminster Peace and Justice Work Group. And as you may or may not know, yesterday, Lynn was given the Liberty Bell Award by the Delaware Bar Association. It's given to someone who is not an attorney, but who has had a profound impact on the justice system in Delaware. And certainly Lynn has done that. And in coordination with Meryem and their work on the attempts to I don't even know what the verb might be, but Meryem's going to tell us to address the inequities in the application of fines and fees in the state of Delaware. So Lynn is, I believe, at the moment on a villa in Italy, and we hope that she is thoroughly relaxing and enjoying herself as she has delegated tonight's program to Meryem. So Meryem started her legal career at a law firm in Wilmington, practicing litigation in the Court of Chancery. She then joined the Public Defender's Office, where she was a trial attorney, practicing first in the Court of Common Pleas and then Superior Court. At that time, one verb is inspired, another is enraged by what she saw her clients facing. She joined advocacy efforts to reform Delaware's fines and fees system, eventually co-leading, I believe with Lynn, the Delaware campaign to End Debtors Prison, which advocates to alleviate poverty as an element of criminal punishment. The last 2 years, Meryem has worked at Juvenile Law Center on eliminating fines and fees for justice-involved kids around the country. And just recently, Meryem and Lynn have founded a new nonprofit, Tide Shift Justice Project, which will be working in Delaware to decrease the size and role of Delaware's carceral and criminal legal systems and advocating for fair and responsive government practices. So now I have said enough by way of introducing Meryem. I'm delighted. We are delighted that you are here this evening and looking forward with great anticipation to what you have to share.
Well, I'm also really delighted to be here. I've heard Lynn talk about this group for years now, so it's nice to see all of you. And for a lot of you, see you again. I know, Mike, I've seen you at campaign meetings. Jane, I've seen you at campaign meetings. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to Dave, who not only worked at Young Conaway with me at that firm that you mentioned, but is now on the board of the new nonprofit Tide Shift Justice Project. So it's great being here with so many friendly faces, and especially so many cat lovers. But with that, we can dive right in. So let me bring my slides up for you. And I'll say I'll share a link to the slides afterwards. I am a person who loves citations, and I want to know where people got stuff from. So I have in the notes for these slides where the data comes from, if anyone's curious or has questions about any of that. So I'll start off, we got a spicy title here, budgeting based on crime. The work that the Campaign to End Debtors Prison has been doing, and the work that I've been doing with Lynn, revolves around reforming fines and fees. And essentially right now in the Delaware criminal legal system and in legal systems around the country, Delaware is not unique. When people are sentenced to a criminal conviction or even a civil violation, a traffic offense, they might get a fine, but they will definitely get fees tacked on top of it. And that has a whole string of ramifications, both for the individual that's faced with those fees and for our government and what that means for how we're funding our government. So what does this look like? Right now in Delaware, a run-of-the-mill misdemeanor can end up costing hundreds of dollars. A very common sentence for a misdemeanor is a $100 fine. Most misdemeanors, for someone who doesn't have other offenses, doesn't have multiple charges that they're facing at the same time, they're generally the recommended sentence under Delaware's Syntax that the judges put together, their bench book, is fines, fees, and restitution only. For most misdemeanors, people are not looking at jail time. They're looking at probation, maybe, but for most things, they're looking at just costs. That's important because 97% of all filings in the criminal or traffic system were misdemeanors every year in Delaware for the past several years. Even though I think a lot of times when we think about the criminal legal system, there's a tendency to think about really serious offenses. Most things in the criminal system are misdemeanors. And so the things that affect the most people are often misdemeanors. So right now, in the criminal legal system, someone could face a $100 fine. But that gets compounded into a much larger total bill when fees are added. In court, fees are often referred to as court costs. And while the purpose of a fine when it's given to someone is that it's part of their sentence, it meets the purposes of the criminal system. It's imposing justice. It's the idea that if you do the crime, you should pay the fine. It's the sentence, right? It's the thing that's supposed to teach them not to do it again. Court costs are completely disconnected from what the offense was. And their intent is not to cause someone not to do something again. It's actually just to generate money. 50 years ago, Delaware didn't have any of the costs that are here. These are all implemented over the last several decades. And it's been something where it's been a little at a time, but then it's compounded into something pretty major. So this is just an example of all the different fees that someone might face. You wouldn't necessarily face all of these. I tried to be as honest as possible in putting this together. So anyone that's sentenced in state court would see a $1 video phone fund fee, a $1 Delgis fund fee, $15 fund to combat violent crimes fee, $10 volunteer ambulance company fund fee, $10 victims compensation fund fee, $10 court security fee. The ones in blue here are fees that would be tacked on for specific offenses. The victims rights fund fee is only tacked on for seatbelt violations. The senior trust fund fee is only tacked on if it is a crime where the victim is over 55. And the SARTEP fee, which stands for Substance Abuse Rehabilitation Treatment Education and Prevention, is only tacked on for certain Title 16 drug offenses. And then lastly, the $50 interstate transfer fee is a fee that only applies to people on probation if they try to transfer their probation to another state. And what binds all of those together, though, is these are fees that were not created by the courts. These were created by the General Assembly. All of these are in the Delaware Code. These were all fees that there was a need to fund something at some point, and the General Assembly decided that it was going to be difficult to fund it through taxes, maybe unpopular, and that this was a back-end way to fund it. So the video fund fee was created when the court started using videos. The Delgis fund fee, similar, it was created afterwards. These are all things that there was a need for funding for some sort of new mechanism or an expansion of a mechanism. And then the fee was created to meet a funding need. The only exception there for a fee that was not created by the General Assembly is this jury trial fee that only applies in the Court of Common Pleas. It is court created and it's a little bit different. But the gist of this is that anyone that's facing a crime, even a misdemeanor, is looking at almost $500 in total court costs as a bill they'll get at the end of their case. To go into how each of these kind of came to be and why it's such a big problem, I kind of have some details here on a few of them. So the court security fee is the $10 fee. It's applied to every conviction in state court. And it actually does something really important. It provides critical funding for court infrastructure. There are 31 and a half full-time state employees that are, their positions, their salaries are funded off of this fee. I know that one of the members of this group is Gail Lafferty. And I don't think I saw her here today, but I just want to give an acknowledgement that the work that she does is really hard. And it's in part because this is a fee that is handled by the courts. They need the fee because they're funding full-time positions that they need in order to just run. But it isn't something that they have full control over. It wasn't something that was created by them. And there's a big funding gap. Anyone that's been following national news and state news knows that crime has been going down the last couple years. That's a good thing that should be celebrated, but it actually means that these fees are taking in less money. And that's been a problem for some of them from the start. The spending authority for this one in particular is just under $3 million. That means that when the legislature created it, they thought that it was going to bring in just under $3 million to fund these positions. I'm not sure it ever has. But in just the last fiscal year 2022, it only brought in 1.5 million, which means the court has had to fund those positions with $1 million missing from what the state originally promised it would get in order to fund those positions. The court has been balancing that deficit using money left over from previous years and turnover where the positions weren't fully being utilized. But it's ultimately unsustainable and not something that can keep going indefinitely. And especially with such a large budget fall here, it's going to happen fast. If it was that they were a couple $100,000 under what they were projected to get from this fee, that would be one thing, but they're missing $1.4 million. Another one, the Delgis Fund fee. So this picture here of a police officer, Delgis is the criminal background check system that the state uses. It does a little bit more than that. When I was a public defender, I had access to Delgis, and it was a application I could bring up on my computer. There was also a web portal, and I could look up my clients' backgrounds and see any prior criminal convictions. I could also look up their DMV records. I could look up whether they were incarcerated, where they were incarcerated, when they had previously been incarcerated. I could calculate any time that they'd been in a level 4 facility, maybe having substance abuse treatment. I could see how long they'd been on probation, what level of probation, if they'd had violations of probation. All of those things were just a couple keystrokes on a computer because of Delgis. It's also the same system that police officers use when they're looking up the same information. If you've ever been pulled over and they say, I'm going to run your license, they're using Delgis to run your license. If you've gone to the DMV and you've gotten a new license, they're using Delgis to check that you're eligible to get a new license and renew. So it's used every day, countless times. And a huge part of its budget is a $1 fee that's added to every conviction in Delaware courts. When that fee was created, it was expected to bring in $260,000 a year. But in fiscal year 2022, it only brought in $116,000. And again, that's been going down year after year. So even though it's really critical infrastructure that everyone working in the courts depends on and uses every day, we're not funding it adequately. One more. The Victims' Rights Fund fee. So this is I put $1 there, but I don't think that is right. If you'll stick with me for 1 second. $20. Here we go. I knew that wasn't right. So it's $20, and and I'm sorry, this is incorrect here. It says applied to every conviction in state court. It's not applied to every conviction in state court. It's just applied to convictions for seatbelt violations under a certain code provision. And it's used to fund, the language is victim notifications and other victim expenses. That's straight from the code. But the biggest example is VineLink. And again, I'll send these slides out afterwards. There's a link there. You're welcome to click on it and check it out. VineLink is a notification system that's advertised as being for victims, but a lot of defendants use it as well. It's just a notification system so that people can know when you can put in anyone that's charged with a crime, and you can know when their court hearings are, and you can know where they are in their sentence, if they are incarcerated still, if they're about to be released. So it's pretty critical information for victims of crime, especially if there's someone who they have, experienced violence from, and they want to know if they're released back into the community. VineLink is the way to do that. And we fund it off of this fee. Again, though, there's a major shortfall. The spending authority for this was $192,000, and that's the annual spending authority, and it's never brought in anything close to that. One more. Video phone fund fee. So this is so critical. When I was a public defender, I used Zoom like this all the time. We used to use Polylink, and then it changed to Zoom. But it's the courts and attorneys use video systems every day. I think I had a statistic that it was something like 10,000 Zoom calls a month are used by the court system. They're used for court proceedings, often a first appearance in JP court. People will appear in front of the magistrate by Zoom. So JP courts are open. There's always someone available 24 hours a day to process an initial arrest. And the reason they're able to be available 24 hours a day and it be fast and efficient is because they do it by Zoom. Capias returns, when someone's returning an arrest warrant, often by Zoom. And then most critically, communicating with people who are incarcerated is often by Zoom. And that's the biggest money saver. It's very expensive to transport someone incarcerated, especially because just because your case is in Newcastle County doesn't mean you will physically stay in Newcastle County. Often defendants will be in Sussex, will be in Vaughan, they'll be in Kent and Sussex counties, but they will have hearings in Newcastle County. And when it's something critical, obviously there are no trials happening by Zoom, but when it's something minor and initial arraignment or a brief conversation with an attorney, having Zoom available to do those meetings is I mean, I don't know how things worked without Zoom, honestly. But this again is something that's really underfunded. So when this fee was created, it was supposed to be bringing in $212,000. But these two charts that are here, these are taken from the annual reports that the Video Phone Fund puts out. And as you can see, the total revenue is substantially under what it's proposed to put out, and its expenditures are often more than what it has been taken in. There's fluctuation here, but it's an unstable funding source, and it's an unstable funding source that's going down. So those are all reasons why it's bad government to be funding critical resources this way, but it's also really bad for people going through the system. The US Federal Reserve reported in 2022 that for an unexpected $400 expense, 24% of Americans would have to borrow or sell something to pay for it, and 13% would not be able to cover the expense at all. That $400 falls right into how much a run-of-the-mill misdemeanor costs in Delaware. And the only reason it costs that much is because we're funding our government infrastructures with those added fees. And so what happens when we fund things that way? This is taken from a debt study group report that came out in December of last year. And essentially, the courts have been having a really hard time being our government debt collectors. It's not what they were set up to do, and they have been set up to be collecting debt this way from a population that didn't have the money to start with. So they've been doing this pretty quietly, and I actually really commend our court system for the work that they've been doing here. They have been going through their books and writing off uncollectible debt. They've written off over $40 million since 2021. But that just goes to show that when these fees are being imposed, when these fees are being imposed, it's supposed to be raising revenue for the government that is funding things we really need. But because it's being imposed on people who never had the money to pay for it in the first place, and it's being done indiscriminately, we're just creating a whole infrastructure where we have debts that will never be paid. Our courts are having to write them off 10 years down the line. And then we're underfunding things that really matter. But I personally never like to talk about problems without talking about solutions. So there are solutions. And Dave, I saw you come off mute. Do you have a question? I love questions.
Yeah, I just wondered the when you reported the amount of money that's been raised by the fees in your prior slides,
Mhm.
was that cash actually that came in was actually paid, or did that include uh debt that might not ever be paid?
No, that was just cash that came in.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Thanks.
So one of the fees that no longer exists is a public defender fee. In 1994, a fee was established so that anytime someone was determined indigent and in need of public defense, they would get a public defender, but then afterwards they have to pay a $50 administrative fee. In 2010, that $50 was increased to $100, and then in 2023, the public defender fee was abolished. Um, it was a part of a larger package, House Bill 244. It eliminated the public defender fee, a probation supervision fee, KPS fee, kiosk fees, all fees in the juvenile system. It ended certain practices around fee and fine collection, including driver's license suspensions, and it created a study group exploring further reforms. So Delaware's already made a big step towards changing its fines and fees process so we're not funding our government this way, but there is still more work to do. So what does that work look like? It looks like more legislation. There are three bills. It's funny when this was being scheduled, this was just good luck. But just earlier this week on Monday, three bills were officially introduced in the Senate that are going to be continuing this work on eliminating fees in our criminal system. I have them linked here for anyone that wants to read the language. It's Senate Bills 282, 283, and 284. One of them will be discharging old debt from fees that were eliminated from that previous bill. So that previous bill got rid of debt going forward, but didn't get rid of old debts. This will get rid of the old debt. And then there's a Senate Bill 283 will be eliminating that Delgis fee that we talked about. And Senate Bill 282 will be eliminating what we're calling small account fees. So the senior trust fund fee, the interstate compact fee, and the SARTEP fee, that's substance abuse rehabilitation, treatment, education, and prevention fee. And when it's eliminating those fees, all of these bills will be replacing the money that was previously coming into those different funds and those different agencies with general fund money. So rather than those things being paid for off the backs of folks going through the criminal legal system, usually who are in the worst spot to have additional expenses, they will be paid through general taxes the way everything else with our government is funded. There are two bills to be on the lookout for. One is a revenue stabilization bill. It would be eliminating the video fund fee, the victims' rights fund fee, and the court security fee, and replacing those fees with money from the general fund. And then the last one is an ability to pay bill, which is slightly complicated, and I didn't go too much into it. But basically, it's that while we want to eliminate all those fees so that we're not funding our government in this really inefficient and cruel manner, it also makes sense to think about how we're imposing fines. Right now, when people get a fine, courts don't look at how much money they have. So if you are a millionaire or if you are living on the street, a lot of times you're getting the same fine. And that means that if you have a lot of money, there's no punishment. And we basically don't have a system to encourage good behavior and correct bad behavior. But if you have no money, a small indiscretion could completely set you off. And so the ability to pay bill is creating, again, kind of a first step so that those who are the least able to afford to pay a fine will have those fines written off through an automatic process. So if you want to learn more or join with the campaign, I put our website on here and my contact information. I welcome any questions that folks have.
I've got one, Miriam, the fines, where does that money go and what's it used for?
Fines, so it's slightly complicated. It generally goes to the general fund though.
Okay. So it's a revenue source for the state as well.
Yeah, although I